Oh, hi, everybody. My name is Matt Storrs, and welcome to Mattsplaining. On today's episode, I have an expert on who I'm very excited to speak with. Expert, please introduce yourself and tell us what you're an expert in.
Hi, my name is Dash Kwiatkowski, and I am an expert in paranormal investigation.
Fantastic. My understanding of paranormal investigation is generally pretty broad. Growing up in Arizona, we have a lot of places that are presumed to be haunted, a lot of gunfights, a lot of men with big mustaches coming in and shooting up a place, and then those folks getting trapped because they haven't paid their bills at the hotel. So they have that unfinished business because also the hotel innkeeper, so to speak, or hotel owner was also shot. And so they're like, well, you guys can't leave because you haven't paid your bill. And ghost currency is a very hard thing to come by. And so that makes it much harder to finish your business and get around. But one of the things that I noticed as I grew up and as I found more and more haunted hotels, and one of the things this is very interesting is, have you seen the remake of Psycho?
I actually have not seen the remake of Psycho.
Okay, so I wouldn't recommend it, but at the beginning of the movie, they do a panning shot and they pan over what the hotel is supposed to be. And it is actually a haunted hotel that then became assisted living facility. And so that assisted living facility in Phoenix is like presumably haunted, but then it's also filled with like the elderly. It has a very spooky aura for the children of Phoenix. And one of the things that I've noticed as I've gotten older is the je ne sais quoi that comes with having a establishment or a park or a kind of community around paranormal, because you want, if you could get, so you have diners, drive-ins, and dives, right? You have Guy Fieri coming to a restaurant and you can then say Guy ate here, right? If you have a paranormal investigator come to your establishment, to your park, to your abode, you can say these paranormal investigators came here and they saw a ghost or they had this paranormal experience. And so I think that a lot of people are like similar to the culinary world, trying to cultivate scenarios where they can have these paranormal experiences to help bring in more attention to their business or to their lives. And so that doesn't mean that you have to have an old house for that to happen. So I know there's a number of instances. There's a documentary show about it, about a house where a number of murders have taken place. And the house isn't particularly old, but there's a litany of ghosts that are just like in that house. And I believe they can only come out once a year on Halloween. And they try and lure more people back to get them into the house and then have more ghosts. And it's like a whole little community. It's like, kind of like a commune in a lot of ways.
And that's a
And
documentary you said?
yeah, that's a documentary. And that is pretty, there's a lot of stuff that goes on. There's a lot of very sex positive ghosts in that house, and some less sex positive ghosts, but some they got time on their hands, so they can kind of go in and explore their wants, needs, and desires in a variety of ways. And so what I'm saying is, like, people don't need to be hindered by the idea of like, oh, I have to find this old farmhouse and oh, hope that it's haunted. You can bring people in and hope that they die, or I'm not saying anybody should kill anybody or anything like that, but like any place, any area has the potential for paranormal activity to go on. You just have to be of an open mind for the ability to recognize that and accept that, and welcome that, to be able to recognize that it is happening. And so don't so you can have your diners, drive-ins, and dives plaque go up and say like, this house was built 2 years ago, and also this one of the people working on the house fell and unfortunately passed away, but now we get to hang out with them, and occasionally we have like a leak in the roof, and that it'll magically be fixed because they want to make sure the house is consistently good. And that's one of the things that a lot of people don't realize, is like a lot of ghosts, a lot of people with unfinished business really just want to make sure that the people around them are doing okay, and they'll walk around and they'll fix things in your house if you let them, and you like kind of welcome them and say, hey, like, I recognize you're here, could you help with that draft that keeps coming in? And they'll be like, oh yeah, totally. And you can save a lot of money on contractors that way. Now, Dash, based on what you've heard so far, about how much of
Yeah.
that would you say was accurate?
I wasn't sure. A lot of people think that they sort of are experts, whether they've seen Ghostbusters a couple of times. A lot of people, I think, sort of assume that they know a lot. So I wasn't sure how much I was gonna have to correct you on. I frankly I don't think any of that was straight incorrect, and I'm very excited to talk to you more about it. I would say I would probably give you like 7 or 8 ectoplasmic discharges out of 10,
Oh,
honestly.
oh, fantastic. Wow.
Pretty
Okay.
good. Yeah, pretty good, honestly. And I'll say, just as sort of an addendum, people don't even have to die for your place to be haunted. Even if it's a
Oh,
brand new spot, you can build it.
oh,
So
interesting.
yeah, so there's a man by the name of John Keel. You may be familiar with the Mothman Prophecies. That's his sort of
Yes.
most famous text. He wrote a couple of other ones. Very paranoid man. But in the Mothman Prophecies, he talks about a place in New York City, a location on 12 Gay Street in the East Village,
Mhm.
and 12 Gay Street, it's a sort of a storied place. It was a speakeasy for a while. I think the person who created Howdy Doody lived there. And also a man named Walter Gibson lived there. Walter Gibson lived there when he was writing a pulp comic called The Shadow. Now, The Shadow, there's a
Yes.
film starring Alec Baldwin. It's not very good.
It is not. It is
It's
very,
not
it is,
very
yes.
yeah. I used to have an action figure of it when I was a kid, and you shine the light on the top and the eyes lit up. Very exciting. But John Keel talks about how this place is haunted by a fictional character from the shadow. And so Keel talks
Interesting.
about the sort of the psychic energy that Walter Gibson brought to the location as he was working on something, as he was creating something. It's what is called in sort of the high strangeness or paranormal investigation community a tulpa. Now, a
Okay.
tulpa is a being made out of thoughts. It's sort of a being that you can make on purpose or on accident. That is, it's sort of it manifests in sort of a haunting of energy. And so even if you don't want to, you can cut out the middleman of having a bunch of people die by just sort of spending time and ritual to create a slew of fun ghosts for your location, sort of regardless of how old the building is.
Absolutely. What got you interested in the paranormal?
I've been very, I used to, growing up, I loved watching ghost shows on TV.
Mhm.
I loved all the sort of the very showy, the very flashy, and a lot of these shows, you come to learn that there's a production assistant hiding behind a door who slams the door when they're out of frame. There's a lot of sort of flash and bang and show. But I had always been very interested in these shows just from sort of an entertainment perspective. And then the older I got, the more sort of strange my own life had sort of become. Different things happen. And my favorite sort of version of paranormal occurrence is the string of synchronicities. I don't know if you're
Mhm.
familiar with the concept of the synchronicity.
I don't know that I am.
So a synchronicity is like a coincidence that is too pointed. It's sort of too on the nose. I
Mhm.
always describe it as something that feels like it was written in fiction that happens in real life.
Okay, yeah, I feel
Um,
like I experience that quite often.
yeah. So I mean, so a lot of times in the paranormal, in the sort of the field of the paranormal, if you are experiencing a lot of synchronicities, people think that either this is sort of letting that you are on a path towards something, or you're on sort of you're coming towards something of meaning, or something out there is trying to get your attention. And so I sort of I watched a paranormal investigation series that I had a lot of synchronicities sort of around my life and my own interests in getting out there and experiencing it and trying to make contact the unknown. And I decided, you know what, finally I'm gonna take this, string of synchronicities that has been showing up, and I'm going to get out there and start investigating. And what I found when I started, I was very much like, I am going to, anytime before we talk to anything, I will light a protection candle and I will make a bunch of statements about nothing is allowed to follow me home and all of this. And I was very much like, oh, there's all these negative things that are out to get you all the time. And the more I've done it, the more I sort of have trust. I think just sort of in my own safety and my own intention, and also just sort of like a wild curiosity about what we're dealing with. A lot of times we'll go to somewhere in nature and really try to sort of communicate with whoever knows what is out there in the woods,
Hmm.
and so those are always very exciting to sort of talk to something that potentially is beyond human experience, something that wasn't human. We very recently we went and we investigated, actually, with Twin Peaks' Ray Wise.
Okay.
He was convinced that his daughter house was haunted. And I do think that he was right. And we went and we investigated Kaina's house,
Hmm.
and that was one of the most recent times that we've really engaged with what definitely felt like human spirits, felt like the spirits of the deceased. And I think that's sort of a misconception that people have about paranormal investigation. I think a lot of times people are like, oh, you're only talking to ghosts. We talk to what I sort of perceive to be ghosts sometimes, but a lot of times we're talking to nature, we're talking to energy, we're talking to. And I think there's a thing that happens where some people in the paranormal will be like, oh, that's a, you're talking to an elemental, or you're talking to some
Hmm.
very specific thing. And my thing is, I don't know, maybe we're talking to Bigfoot, who knows. And I think that sort of is what I really enjoy about it, is this sort of this openness. I think when people try to take this thing that I'm doing that is admittedly a pseudoscience, and I think they try to really pump up the science part. And for me, I think I really enjoy the ambiguity. I really enjoy there's a specific investigation method called the Estes method that I like very much, that involves one person plugging into a device that just sort of cycles radio frequencies through
Hmm.
headphones for them. And so that person is just parroting what they're hearing, so they can only hear the radio, and other people around them are asking questions. And so you've created a thing where the person cannot hear the questions being asked, but all they can hear is what the radio is saying. And so when they parrot words back, they're just hearing little snippets of words from radio stations. And a lot of times you'll find that it gets very responsive and very directly responsive with the questions being asked, which is fairly inexplainable to me, at least. And one of my favorite things is sometimes you'll ask, like, is anyone here? And very clearly the person will respond no. And I love that because, well, who said no then?
Right, absolutely. That's that's it seems like they have a sense of humor, so to speak, to it.
Absolutely.
And it's like, no, I'm not here.
Yeah.
Why are you talking? Like it's like when somebody knocks on the door of a millennial's house and we're
Yeah.
like, I don't want to answer the door. I don't know who you are.
Yeah, responding no one's home when someone rings the doorbell.
Exactly. Ah, that's fantastic. So how do you typically approach an investigation? What kind of draws you? Is there a way that like you pick your investigations or like things that like kind of draw you in or that sort of thing?
Definitely. So I think when I'm doing, there's definitely points where we get asked. So like
Hmm.
with investigating with Ray Wise, we were asked to come and investigate, and we got our gear, we got sort of prepared in that way. When I'm sort of at home, I will pick a spot that just feels very like, there's a hilltop near here that's got in a big clearing, and
Hmm.
it just feels very open. The sort of the energy, the vibes feel very like very interactive. And
Hmm.
a lot of times I'll find that just through like walking around. I do a lot of foraging for
Hmm.
mushrooms, and so
Fantastic.
I'm out in the woods a decent amount anyway. And so when a spot feels sort of particularly resonant or relevant, we'll definitely make time to sort of to investigate those places sort of in the evening.
Hmm.
And also just I think for people who are looking to get into it, there's haunted stuff nearby everywhere. And it is one Google search away. And that's, I think, one of the really fun elements of it. The first time I went out and investigated, I think I Googled like haunted locations within 30 miles of where I live.
Yeah.
And we found this abandoned military fort and people had said that there are all of these like interesting death omens, these sort of like the apparitions of large black dogs that show up, which is sort of an
Hmm.
omen of death in a couple of cultures. And I had been sort of having my own little series of synchronicities with sort of death omens consistently, and so I was like, all right, that's the one, got to go to that one. And I think that's part of it, is just following those little trails, following those little alignments that are maybe not synchronicities just yet, but could develop into one. When we actually, so we went out and investigated outdoors at 12 Gay Street, the place that I was
Hmm.
talking about before.
Yeah.
We couldn't get in. It was locked and we don't know who owns it. But we set up outside and we did some of our investigation stuff. But even leading to that, that was its own little synchronicity where we were in New York for a friend's birthday,
Hmm.
and the friend had been like, "Oh, I want to go. Let's go do a paranormal investigation somewhere." And I was like, "Totally. Where do you want to go?" And they were like, "Oh, there's this spot that used to be a speakeasy and it's haunted by flappers." And I was like, "That sounds great." And I was like, "Oh, there's this other spot that John Keel wrote about." And I don't know where it was, but it's haunted by this fictional character. And we're like, "Oh, that sounds good too." And we're having trouble deciding between these two locations. And then we Googled, yeah. So we Googled which location with the flappers one and found out that it had been the same location the whole time. The
Oh, I
two
love
different
that.
spots. Yeah. And we were like, all right, well, that's the one. Like that is very clearly where we're supposed to be out investigating tonight. And then what was wild about that is we went there, we did this investigation. There's a cute theater guy that I used to hook up with sometimes who showed up to join us. He was just like, "Oh yeah, I'll come hang out." And when he plugged into the Estes method, that sort of that technique that I like, he
Hmm.
started saying things, very specific things like times, locations, names of the people that we would be staying with in Tennessee
Oh,
when
wow.
we would go shoot the paranormal investigation pilot that we shot, that
Hmm.
he had no idea. I hadn't told him any of this information. So it was this moment of just like, yeah, well, this is, we sort of synchronicity brought us here, and now it is sort of confirming this thing that we're planning to do even down the line. And I think it's stuff like that that really sort of, it feels very playful. It definitely feels, there's certainly a sense of humor in sort of in magic and the strange and all the sort of the weird things that sort of seem to reach out.
Absolutely. This has been so fascinating and so insightful for me. If people wanted to learn more about you or more about paranormal investigating, where would you recommend that they go?
So if you want to learn more about me, I am on social media. I'm just my name most places. It's at Dash Kwiatkowski. That's definitely not intuitive to spell, but I'm sure it will be in the episode description.
Yes, it will.
So I actually have a paranormal investigation series that we just launched. We just debuted the pilot online. People can find that at youtube.com/at Team Liminal. You have to put the at sign in there now. I don't know
Mm.
why YouTube decided to start doing that. I think it's silly, but that's, yeah. So it's a paranormal investigation series that is co-hosted. So it's me and it's Rosa Escondon, and we in our pilot we go down to Tennessee and we investigate the Bell Witch haunting, which is sort of one of the oldest hauntings on record in this country.
Mm.
The show is called Liminal, and it is sort of premised around this idea that I have, that queerness and strangeness are sort of intrinsically tied together. There's this understanding in the paranormal that liminal spaces, spaces that are in flux, or spaces that are sort of like bridges and boundaries, are a real attraction point for ghosts and the strange. And so the premise for me is sort of that if my, as a non-binary mixed race person, my identity is sort of permanently liminal, and how does that sort of affect the investigation? And as we investigated, I found that I think it very much does. I'm very convinced that sort of hauntings and strangeness are very sort of drawn to queer people generally. So that's, yeah, that's
Mhm.
that's Liminal. That's youtube.com/at Team Liminal, and then liminaltv.com is the website for that.
Fantastic. That sounds so interesting. I can't wait to check it out. This has been so wonderful. I can't thank you enough for joining me today. This has been so good.
Thank you so much for having me. I had a lot of fun. It's always fun. It's always fun talking about ghosts with cool people.
Thank you so much. That's very kind of you. My name is Matt Storrs, and this has been Mattsplaining. Before we go today, I want to thank Ryan Lawson, my dear friend, for making the theme music for Mattsplaining. Ryan can be reached at beatblenderstudios@gmail.com or at Beat Blender Studios on Instagram and TikTok.